Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. Sasquatch are real, oh yes, that's what it means, as one of my subscribers tells me that I should tell people, just in case not everybody heard that is exactly what it means. I do hope you're very well and that life is treating you kindly and that you're looking forward to the lovely weekend that lies ahead for us. Well, I've got a really amazing story for you tonight that is going to make you laugh. It certainly made me smile. You're going to have a good laugh at this one. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Oliver and my Bigfoot encounter happened to me in the Pacific Northwest when I was a young boy of 11 years old in 1983. I lived in a quintessential rustic rural neighbourhood where all the houses were uniquely individual and all painted in pretty bright colours, so reminiscent of the 80s period. Our sunflower yellow house was known as the doll's house in our street because of its perfect box-like symmetry, angular coal-black roof, and pretty white wooden flamed French windows. All the houses on our streets had their own front and back yards that overlooked very pretty green rolling hills, valleys, and mountainous outcrops. On the right-hand side of our street was an area of natural, gorgeous emerald green forest that literally stretched back for hundreds upon hundreds of miles. You'd be forgiven for assuming that there was a secret gardening competition going on in the street among the locals, but of course no one ever said such a thing. But you could clearly see the neighbours were all trying to outsmart and outdo each other with better floral displays in their front yards than the next person. And even at 11 years old, these subtle adult contentions were all so clearly apparent to me. At number 20, Mrs. Payne, for example, would plant a beautiful display of pretty white flowers against one of her walls, and the following day, I kid you not, Mr. Piper at number 22 had brought an even more superior selection of white flowers and had added an extra addition of white pebbles and pretty white trellising, creating a much more dazzling effect that quite literally made Mrs. Payne's previously very attractive floral display look almost paltry and pathetic by contrast. He might as well have written in bright blazing smug crimson paint across the walls that mine is better than yours. It was an ongoing invisible contentious competition between neighbours that was relentless over the spring and summer months. Why could they not be simpler like kids and have straightforward competition together? What was all this secrecy, pomposity and smugness of eclipsing your neighbour all about, I would wonder? Why did adults have to be so peculiarly complicated? Did it really matter at the end of the day whose floral display was best this summer? As a young boy growing up, my main objective was to have a whole lot of fun, and as the only son of two parents, I spent most of my time with two other children in our neighbourhood of similar age to myself, Colin, who was 11, and Eloise, who was 12. We would spend ages playing all kinds of exciting games together. And what I loved about Eloise was she was no different to any other boy, and loved roughing it and getting dirty with all our boyish games and pranks. We would swim in the pool in our backyards, ride our bikes around the neighbourhood, climb trees and play soccer. It was all incredibly fun. As is the case with any small town, where gossip is rife in the bathroom, and dutifully act on my mother's bidding by telling Ditzy Dot how incredibly delicious her cake actually was. I added more cinnamon, she told me proudly, to enhance the chocolate flavour. I remember thinking, Ditzy Dot, you may as well have added an atomic bomb to that cake, because my word, that was one heck of a hot explosion in my mouth, and not the good kind either. My mother strictly forbade me to tell Ditzy Dot about her cookery debacle. Now, dear, you must always be gracious. It's very sweet of Mrs. Dickens to make you a cake, so you must never mention the jalapeno pepper gaff, because that would almost certainly hurt her feelings, and you don't want to do that, do you? The way my mother talked, I was beginning to believe that all adults were mentally tenuous, feeble and fragile. So much so that you could not say how it was, because they would be so easily offended and aggrieved and disgruntled. I remembered thinking it was way too convoluted to be an adult, and I fancied myself like Peter Pan, never growing up, and my friends wholeheartedly agreed with me. I agree, said Eloise. I cannot understand grown-ups, one little bit. My mother got so upset because the neighbours' roses were bigger than hers. I promise you she actually started crying about it. She was so overwrought. I almost had to console her. Can you believe the nerve of it? She actually asked me to go around to the neighbour's house to offer to take Tigger, her dog, for a walk, and then to surreptitiously sneak into the backyard, pretending that I was looking for a stray tennis ball that I'd thrown for Tigger that had accidentally ended up in her yard shed. I was to snoop around and see what rose food she was actually using. She stressed to me that it was paramount that I must not, under any circumstances, ever forget the name and the brand of the rose food in question, because it was of the utmost importance. That's where adults are completely crazy, said Colin. Why didn't she just say, your roses are so lovely and big, Mrs. Saunders? May I ask you what rose food you used? Is it that difficult? Exactly my point, I said. I told you, adults are really strange. The strangest of all being Ditzy Dot, laughed Colin. Remember when she forgot you were a boy and baked you a baby Barbie doll cake with jalapeno pepper, he hooted. I'd rather not remember that event, I said. I still remember how badly my mouth burnt from all that hot pepper. It was indeed true. Our street did have its fair share of oddballs, but Ditzy Dot was quite literally the cream of the crop. Ditzy Dot was sometimes so dithery that she was often seen wearing her own brassiere over her dress, and she would sometimes wear the oddest of clothes combinations together, not taking into account style, size, colour, length, or even weather conditions into consideration. I have actually seen her wearing a kid's school blazer over a man's shirt, with a long flowing skirt 5 sizes too big for her, which is why it was hardly a wonder that she was often regarded as the bag lady. Another thing about Ditzy Dot is that she was a collector of absolutely everything she could get her hands on. I would see her going to the local woods, coming back with an old shopping trolley loaded with sticks, pine cones, and even pebbles. I would ask her what she was intending to use all those items of nature for, and she really appeared gormless and bemused, and proceeded to tell me that she had collected them because they were rather nice. I mean, what does that have to do with purposeful intent? Another area Ditzy Dot loved to frequent was the local dumpster. Sometimes we would ride on our bicycles past the dumpster and wave at her and tinkle our bells, and she would look up at us with a toothless grin because she had misplaced her dentures that morning and was covered in head to toe with someone's leftover baked beans. It would seem that Ditzy Dot was intent on gathering people's disposed items as valuable collectibles. She would shake her head in horror and complain bitterly at the things she retrieved from the dumpster that people had so carelessly, nonchalantly thrown away, with so little regard for the apparent value of the item in question. I would watch her shake her browned head of curls despairingly, as if people's behaviour was a huge enigma to her. "What is wrong with people these days?" she said. "Look at this," she would say, retrieving an old gnarled material dog bed that was falling apart at the seams and stunk to high heaven of wet dog, and had clearly seen much better days. "Now who would throw something like this away?" she said. "It's still in perfect condition." I would watch her put it into her shopping cart in absolute horror. "Mrs. Dickens," I'd say, "you don't even have a dog." "Really, boy," she'd say, "I don't see what that's got to do with anything." "Well," I explained, "of what use is it to you if you don't have a dog to sleep in it?" "Do they not teach you anything in school these days, boy?" she would say to me. Another time she pulled out a very dirty old plastic kid's potty from the dumpster and thought it was such a great mixing bowl, and it took me a long time to explain to her that it wouldn't be very sanitary to use for her cooking. I was dreading the prospect of my next birthday cake I'd be forced to eat by my incessant mother that had been sloppily mixed in an old kid's dirty potty before being presented to me. Such a horrifying thought was making me nauseous and desirous to throw up. Sometimes when Ditzy Dot was out shopping in the supermarket, passing shoppers would surreptitiously put money in her hands because they thought she was a vagrant, when in reality she never had a money issue one day in her life. She would say to us that she was so blessed because perfect strangers would simply just give her cash randomly. "I'm a money cow," she would tell me proudly. "People give me money out of the blue for no reason at all." One day when I was playing in the backyard with my 2 friends, we decided to climb the old oak tree that overlooked Ditzy Dot's home. We loved spying on her because she did the most peculiar congenial things that always made us crack up with laughter. My father had given me a pair of binoculars for the purposes of bird watching, But we had quickly learnt that scrutinising Ditzy Dots through our binoculars was infinitely more interesting and preferable than watching the beautiful birds in our garden, because she was always doing the craziest, most wacko things. "What's she doing now?" asked Eloise again. "Don't tell me she's eating cat biscuits again. I think she thinks they're pretzels. I remember she came over to our house once and ate Purdy's biscuits when she came over for tea. She picked them up off the floor and ate them in front of my mum and I, and swore that they were the best snack she'd ever eaten. She even made a mental note of the fish flavour. Mackerel, I think it was." I precariously balanced my body on the tree branch and focused my binoculars on Ditzy Dot's kitchen, and I nearly dropped the binoculars in sheer shock. "What is it?" asked Eloise. "You've gone as white as a sheet. What's Ditzy Dot doing now?" she asked. "We have a very big problem," I said to my friends. "A very big problem indeed." "What kind of problem?" asked Eloise, looking mystified. "We have an ape problem," I said. "I don't know how else to tell you, but it appears that Ditzy Dots has only gone and kidnapped a baby ape from the local zoo." "But how could she do that?" asked Eloise in horror. "How is that even physically possible? No one goes to the zoo and surreptitiously nicks an ape. You'd never get away with it. Someone would spot you." "Well, Ditzy Dot has," I said. "She's feeding the baby ape formula in a bottle in a high chair in the kitchen, and I'm not kidding you either. Look if you don't believe me," I said, handing the binoculars to my friends. "Golly gumdrops, he's right," said Eloise, looking through the binoculars in horror once she had squirreled her way up the tree. "What beats me is surely the zoo would have noticed it had gone missing." "Look," I said, "we need to handle this situation with kid gloves. You know how difficult Ditzy Dot can be. In the morning I'll have a solution to our problem. I can promise you that." And so it was that very evening I was sitting at dinner, playing with my roast potatoes, with my knife and fork, and my mother asked me why I was not hungry and why I appeared to be playing with my food. "You're not coming down with something, are you, dear?" she asked me, looking worried, running her hand over my forehead. "It would seem your temperature's quite normal." "I was just wondering, Mum, if it's all right for a human to raise an ape in America." I watched my father nearly choking on his potatoes in absolute horror. "Sonny boy," he said, "don't you get any ideas in that funny head of yours. I draw the line at owning an exotic pet, and owning an ape is crossing the line far too far, even for me." "Your father's right, dear," said my mother. "Getting an ape would not be appropriate. Besides, when they do get older, they're very mischievous. On a finer point, I doubt you can even own such an exotic pet here in North America. They're not an indigenous species, you see, to our part of the world, which definitely increases the likelihood that you'll be unlikely to be able to own one or rear one yourself. I know you'd like a brother and sister, but you know our situation." "What if someone stole an ape from the zoo? What then?" I asked. My father looked incredibly alarmed. "Don't even think about it, sonny boy. An ape stolen from a zoo goes right back to its mother where it rightly belongs. So don't you even think about it, or I'll come after you like a steam train, sonny boy." "Thanks, Dad," I said. "You've just answered my question." The following morning I told my friends that we had to confront Ditzy Dot head on about the ape that she had stolen, because she needed to return it to the mother immediately, and it was as straightforward as that, and we needed to return it to the zoo from whence it actually came. Moving forward, as you can imagine, confronting Ditzy Dot about the little ape was not an easy discussion to have, but finally she did admit that she had found the ape in the woods when she was gathering pine cones. "I thought I'd give him a ride in my cart," she said, "when I found him in the nest. But when I got home I realised he was still sitting in the cart, and that I'd brought him back with me by mistake. So I had been taking care of him ever since with formula, and he's very happy, I promise you." "You got this ape from the woods?" I asked in shock. "You didn't steal it from the zoo?" "No, it's from the woods," she insisted. "How would I be able to take a zoo ape? You can't even reach them in their glass cages." I examined the baby ape very closely, taking her into my arms. I've never been keen on babies before, but this baby was the exception to that rule. She was the sweetest, most adorable, affectionate, lovable and funny baby that I've ever seen in my entire life. It was the size of a 1-year-old baby, but this creature was much younger than that. It was much more alert and brighter than a human baby, with these very big, brown, interested eyes that would follow you everywhere with an inquisitive interest and intrigue. It appeared unusually bright and sharp and clever for its age, and unlike a human baby, it didn't howl or cry at all. It just seemed to make a very cute little chattering sound. I noticed that the pinkish creature was also quite human-like in appearance, much more so than actually ape, which did leave me wondering what this curious ape-like creature was, with only a little scattering of hair over its body. It kept reaching out to play with my hair and tugging it with its little hand, and when I reacted with a "ouch," it would chuckle away happily to itself. "Mrs. Dickens," I said, "if you really did get this baby ape from the woods, we really are going to need to return it to its mother. You have unintentionally embezzled a baby ape, and it is morally reprehensible and very wrong. If this were a human child, you would be in very serious grave trouble with the police. You would have already been arrested, and your face would be splashed all over the papers, and everybody would be talking about you in town. Imagine what the poor mother is feeling without her baby. I know for an 11-year-old I was laying it on very thick, but I really wanted Ditzy Dot to understand the gravity of this very serious situation." Ditzy Dot's innocent brown eyes flooded may be, but she most certainly was not a liar, and was usually as open as a book, unlike the other adults that I knew. Luckily I was able to recover my old stroller from the back of our garage, which my mother had never ever thrown away, in the vain hope that she'd fall pregnant again. I gather it was a miracle that she had fallen pregnant with me in the very first place, as the doctors had assured her that she was unlikely that she'd ever have children again. So my mother was amazed when I came along. My mother had unrelentingly hung on to the fleeting, yearnful hope that one day a miracle of nature would abound, and she would be blessed with a baby girl. But to date, that long-hoped-for voracious miracle had all but eluded her. So there we were, all three of us kids, venturing towards the woods to return the baby ape. The beautiful ape-like humanoid was being wheeled along in the stroller like a regular child, and she appeared to be enjoying the ride, as her cute little face was making the sweetest expressions, and her bright brown inquisitive eyes were assimilating everything and missing nothing. She kept making the cutest chattering sounds, and appeared to be really enjoying her little adventure. "She is the most beautiful baby I've ever seen," said Eloise. "I so wish we could keep her. She's just so cute." "Well, we can't, Eloise," I snapped. "I wish you would stop acting all grown up and important, just because we're delivering an ape to its mother. It's all gone to your head, I think," said Eloise. "I liked you better when you wanted to be Peter Pan. Then you were really like a child." "Today, Eloise," I told her, "is my day to be a man. We have a very important job to do." I truly had no idea what to expect as we entered the woods. I knew we could not leave the baby without ensuring that the mother returned to collect it, otherwise it was truly abandoned. I would reluctantly then have to involve my parents as to what the next course of action should be. As it had only been 48 hours since Ditzy Dot had taken the baby from the woods, I was really praying with all my heart that mother and son would be finally reunited. The pine forest was very beautiful and smelt like Christmas. I always loved this place because it was such a tranquil haven and a glorious area to play around with my friends, especially when the sunny weather was way too hot on a summer's day. I always found the shade of the forest so cooling and refreshing, offering just enough light through the branches to allow the beams of sunlight to dapple the forest floor in a soft, pretty light. The forest was full of maples, red oaks, ash, spruce and pine trees, and it was always teeming with an abundance of wildlife, from white-tailed deer to squirrels and rabbits, and so it was not a surprise for us to uncover a very inquisitive squirrel tucking into an acorn and observing us with a very keen interest, as if to say, "What are you doing here?" The forest was filled with a chorus of pretty birdsong and warbles, and I could feel my heart fluttering with excitement. I just knew in my gut that something quite magnificent was about to transpire. I could sense it in every fibre of my being. "She's expecting us," said Eloise suddenly. "I feel it in my gut. She knows we're returning her baby. She's been expecting us for quite a while." Colin looked startled. "I can't believe you said that." "I've been thinking the very same thing," he said. "The thought just wafted in my head from nowhere. And I've never been much of a thinker. I usually just draw blanks, but I keep thinking she's expecting us." "I feel it too," I said. She must really be waiting for us." Suddenly we found the oak tree that Ditzy Dot had told us all about, and sure enough there was a nest there lying in between a pile of rocks, stacked up like a fire pit, creating a rustic-looking cot, in the woods, and placed in a very discreet area tucked away from inquisitive prying eyes. It was hard to believe that Ditzy Dot had even discovered it. The nest was lined with soft mosses and grasses, and I knew at once that this was the baby's little nursery, and I lifted up the baby and put it into the stone-like cot. Now we need this to hide close by to make absolutely sure the mother returns to collect her baby, I told my friends. Now hide. We haven't got much time to lose. All three of us proceeded to take cover behind the shelter of a very large grand oak tree, and then we saw her. She came dashing out of the shadows faster than a flash of greased lightning and proceeded to grab her baby very quickly and fast and hold her baby in her arms as if her very life depended on it. And she wore a jubilant, happy expression all over her face. I could feel tears welling and rising in my eyes, and even Eloise was crying. I can't help myself, she admitted. This is the most poignant reunion I've ever seen. The mother is deliriously happy, and so is the baby. Look, the baby's so delighted to see its mother. Look how happy it is. I can't believe this. This is so magical. But what was she, I wondered, marvelling the mother for a compelling moment, because I had no idea what kind of bipedal creature she actually was. The only way I can describe her to you is looking like she was part human and part ape, if that's at all possible. There was no doubt she was magnificent. I was marvelling her in the same way that I would admire a lion or a rhino, because that's how imposing and majestic and impressive she was. Even though I was very young at the time, I would guess she was at least over 8 foot tall. You see, my dad's over 6 foot, and this creature would have easily towered over him by at least 2 feet. I think she was between 700 and 800 pounds and about 4 foot wide. She was covered all over her body with long flowing hazel brown hair, and it was a little matted and tangled in parts, but that did not matter at all or make her any the less more awesome. I noticed she had very overlong arms that were so big she would possibly have no difficulty walking on all fours as on 2 feet. Her whole body was massively colossal and ripped with muscle in every single area. I think she could have easily made a bodybuilder look small in comparison to her. The shoulders on her body were quite literally huge and highly developed and very pronounced, reminding me of those swimmers that swim the butterfly stroke in the Olympic Games. I noticed her head was shaped like a cone, and she virtually had no neck. I was observing her through my binoculars behind the tree in anticipation of getting a really brilliant view of her, and my sharp lens definition did not disappoint. Her face was both gentle and kind and sweet, and so was that of her baby. I could definitely see the resemblance, and there was no doubt in my mind that the baby was most assuredly hers, although her full dangling, hair-covered breast announced her motherhood only too clearly. I noticed she had yellow-brown deep-set eyes, a furrowed brow ridge, and a very large flat nose, and a slender mouth. We stood in awful admiration as we observed her cradle her baby, tuck it under her arms, and then move away so incredibly fast. It was a powerfully stirring and efficacious moment for all three of us. 1 minute she was there, and then she was gone as fast as lightning. She moved with elegance, grace and speed, just like that of a cheetah, and you could have been forgiven for saying, "Did I really actually just see that?" Years after this extraordinary, evocative, pivotal event in my young, wonderful life, I look back on this moment in time with such fond, magical memories, as seeing that mother reunited with her baby had to be the most breathtaking, moving thing that I have ever seen in my entire life. I know that there is no conceivable possible way that anybody else on this earth but Ditzy Dot herself could have found something like that baby ape in its nest on the forest floor. She always found things that other people could never find, like she found Mrs. Salmon's diamond ring that had been missing for 5 long years, and Mr. Piper's old pipe that had gone missing for 15. My mother did give birth to a baby 2 years after this incredible event, and the doctors described my sister Caroline as yet another extraordinary miracle, born from a woman who was considered unable to have children. So miracles do exist in the most unlikely of places. Sometimes so never overlook the possibility of attaining a miracle yourself, because believe me, they will and do always happen. Ditzy Dot sadly died about 10 years ago, but I always think of her standing in the dumpster covered in baked beans, getting excited about someone's cast-offs. I remember her with such great warmth and thankfulness of heart because of my encounter with that hairy humanoid. I now know that the creature I encountered in the woods all those years ago was a Bigfoot, and I feel so privileged to have physically seen such an extraordinary creature. If it hadn't been for the forgetful, innocent and whimsical charms of Ditzy Dot, that encounter would have never been conceivably possible. All I can say is that that is the most unbelievable story. I just loved it, and it made me laugh so much. I mean, Ditzy Dot finding that baby. I don't think anybody else could have found it but Ditzy Dot. And what an incredible encounter. Until next time, goodbye and good night.